Please, is back in session.
You may be seated. Attorney Cantor La Mesa.
Mr. Beam, I think before break, I was having you look at State's Exhibit 117. Do you have a working knowledge of the U.S. Coast Guard navigation rules?
I have a knowledge that I would say is equivalent to what a boater would have.
Okay.
I'm not one who is, I don't consider myself to be an expert in all the finer points of navigation rules.
Okay. So you're not an expert on those rules, correct?
I have some knowledge of them, but I wouldn't say that I have an in-depth expertise on all the fine points, no.
Okay. So you would have to look up those rules just as anyone else if you were looking at a certain fact scenario. Is that right?
I'm sorry, can you rephrase that? I'm not sure I understood what you said.
You would have to look up the rules just as anyone else would if you were looking at a different fact scenario. You would have to look up rules.
It depends. I mean, there are some rules, some situations I know the rules for.
Okay.
And there are some I would look up, yes.
So, do you know what Rule 5 is?
If I knew the title, I might know the content, but I don't specifically have the rules memorized in order by head.
Doesn't Rule 5 describe the proper lookout required?
Like I said, I'd have to look it up to verify that.
Okay. And in this scenario, is there something called a stand-on versus a give-way vessel?
Yes.
What is the stand-on vessel?
Stand-on vessel is the vessel that is obligated to maintain course and speed.
Okay. And what is the give-way vessel? What does that mean?
The giveaway vessel has the obligation to yield, to stay out of the way of the other vessel.
Okay. Are there any exceptions to this stand-on vessel in the rules? That they should have to deviate from maintaining course and speed?
Well, there are some situations where a vessel that is encountering a larger vessel which is restricted in its ability to navigate, say, in either shallow water or a narrow channel,
Okay.
should not interfere. For example, if I'm on a small boat on a river and a freighter is coming toward me and he doesn't have room to get out of the way, the rules don't allow for or require that freighter run aground and ditch its vessel on the shore in order to not run over the small motorboat.
Right. Okay. So the stand-on vessel would have to avoid that collision or avoid that give-way vessel in that situation.
The stand-on vessel is, by definition, the vessel that has the obligation to continue on its maintain course and speed.
But there are exceptions you just talked about, right?
Well, in those exceptions, I would rephrase which one is, stand-on and which one is the giveaway vessel.
I'm sorry?
By definition, the stand-on vessel is the one that, maintains course and speed. If you present a situation where you have what you describe as an exception, then the stand-on vessel in one situation is no longer the stand-on vessel in another.
Okay.
So,
are you familiar with the Rule 17? Actions by stand-on vessels?
I've read it.
I'm sorry?
I have read it.
Okay. And doesn't that say when, from any cause, the vessel required to keep its course and speed finds itself so close that collision cannot be avoided by the action of the give-way vessel alone, it shall take such action as will best aid to avoid collision. Doesn't it say that?
I don't have it memorized. I'd have to read it.
Does it sound familiar?
Yes?
Do you have any reason to doubt what I just read to you is in Rule 17?
Let me put it this way. I don't rely on my ability to memorize navigation rules. Those kind of things I would look up. And in fact, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to show me what you just read.
I'm sorry?
I'd like to see what you just read
Okay.
in context.
May I?
You may.
You see number 117 in front of you? I'm going to show you Rule 17. So page 27 shows Rule 17. Can you review that for me?
Yes, ma'am, I read it.
I'm sorry?
Yes, ma'am, I read it.
You've read it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you agree that there are exceptions to the stand-on vessel?
I don't know if exceptions is the word I would use, but there are certainly scenarios where the rules allow for each operator to take the best action possible to avoid a collision.
And that's like in Rule 8, correct? Actions to avoid a collision? Are you familiar with Rule 8?
I believe so.
Can I show you that rule as well?
Sure.
May I?
You may.
I'm showing you now page 17 of State's Exhibit 117. Do you see that?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you see Rule 8 on that page?
Yes, I have Rule 8.
Does Rule 8 talk about actions to avoid collision?
Yes, ma'am.
So a lot of these rules talk about being responsible boaters and making sure that each boat is looking out for something in the way of that boat. Isn't that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. When you talked about the crossing situation in Rule 15, does that apply to boats only in sight of each other?
I believe there's two sections.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
There's two sections that are, I guess I would call them headings in the rules. One is which, a set of rules that apply under the category of when vessels are in sight of each other, and another set that's under a heading of rules which apply regardless of visibility.
Okay. And what rule is that?
What rule is it that says that?
Yes.
I'm just saying that it's the way that they're organized in some of the NAV rules publications, that it's just headings they're under. It's not
Okay.
a rule per se. It's the way they're broken up.
But do you agree that you can only see if you're in a crossing situation when you're in sight of the other boat?
Yes, unless you're on a larger vessel equipped with radar or something of the sort.
Right.
But
And
for
we're
smaller
talking-
recreational boats, yes.
Okay, we're talking just about boats that aren't equipped with radar, just by boats that you have to be able to see one another, correct?
Yes.
And this collision happens at night, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, when you talked in your second conclusion about both vessels being underway, and underway simply means that they weren't anchored, correct?
Are anchored or tied fast to a pier or dock.
Okay. And so you talked that you agreed with Rich McCullough's report that the bass tracker was either not moving or moving very slow. Is that right?
Yes.
And you didn't have anything else to tell you other than that? Tell you anything else other than that, right?
I didn't have anything else to tell me. I'm sorry, I don't understand your question.
You didn't have anything else to tell you that it was moving fast, that the bass tracker was moving fast. Everything you did and everything you reviewed said the bass tracker was either moving slow or sitting still. Is that right?
That's a fair statement.
Okay.
I didn't find any evidence that would indicate to me that the bass tracker was traveling at a high rate speed.
Okay. Did you have evidence to suggest that the bayliner was moving at a high rate of speed?
Define what you mean by high rate of speed for me.
Over the speed limit. Did you have anything to suggest that the bayliner was traveling over the speed limit?
And you're referring to the specific numerical value of what value?
Miles per hour?
Yes.
Do you know that the speed limit on that reservoir at night is 10 miles per hour?
Yes.
Okay. And did you have any evidence or anything that you reviewed which suggested that that bayliner was going over 10 miles per hour?
I didn't have any physical evidence that I felt was something that I could, show by calculation or with, specific objectivity to come up with a specific value.
Okay. You said before that you had the defendant's statement, correct? The audio files of his statement?
Yes.
And in that statement, how fast does he say he was going?
I don't recall him saying a specific number.
You don't recall him saying that he was going 25 miles per hour?
Now that you mentioned, I think I recall him saying that he was pretty sure he wasn't going over 25.
Okay. And that he was going at 25 or below 25, is that right?
Well, that would be another way to phrase what he said. It means the same thing.
Okay. Did you ever measure the distance covered by the Bayliner going at 25 miles per hour?
I don't know what you mean by measure the distance.
Could you tell me how far he would go in distance-wise at 25 miles per hour?
Well, sure, I could tell you that.
Did you yeah, that's right, you weren't at the lake, right? You didn't go over to the reservoir?
Objection. This won't be testified.
Sustained.
Did you go to the reservoir in relation to this case?
Am I allowed to answer? Or?
Yes, you may answer this one.
I did visit the reservoir.
And when did you do that?
Yesterday on the way in. I stopped and surveyed the area from the bridge.
Did you take any measurements from the campground to the bridge?
No.
But you didn't do that, you didn't visit the lake prior to writing your report?
No.
Why is it that the speed limit at night on the water would be so low?
Objection.
Sustained.
Do you know why they lower the speed limit on the water at night?
Objection. Can you really testify as to why somebody else set the speed limit?
I think this is beyond the scope of this witness, so the objection is sustained.
In conclusion number 3 in your report, you talk about the lantern. Is that right?
That's right.
I'm sorry, did you answer?
Yes, ma'am, that's right.
Okay. You talk about the lantern in that conclusion. Do you recall listening to the defendant's statement about seeing any lights that night?
My recollection is that Dr. Yurich didn't see any lights on another vessel prior to the accident.
Okay. So from what you remember him saying he didn't see any lights prior to the collision. Is that right?
That's what I recall.
Right.
Yes. Yes. You keep trailing off. If you could try to keep your voice up.
Yes,
Thank you.
apologize.
You measured the height of the stern light. Is that correct?
I measured the length of the stern light pole.
The length of the pole. Were you able to see how far it projected out from the stern deck? Did you put it in that socket that was in the
Yes,
back?
I did.
Did you measure that?
I don't know that I measured it after it was in there. It was a fairly short socket, so
Okay.
after measuring the pole, I didn't measure
So
it again.
if you could then tell us how long the stern light pole was, the 360-degree light.
I don't recall the number.
You know, do you have it anywhere in your, do Do you have any notes or?
Not anything I have with me.
Okay. Is it depicted in a photograph that you took as a part of your investigation?
It should be, if it was visible, which I recall that it was, laying on the deck surface, it should be part of the scan data, so it should be in, its dimensions should be recorded in the scan data.
Okay. Can you give me a proof?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Kathleen. I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 15. I know you're holding something. Do you recognize that?
The card or the item you're holding?
The item I'm holding, not necessarily the card. Does it appear to be that stern light that you measured when you went out for your inspection?
It will be. It's an all-around white light on a pole.
Okay. When you went out for your inspection, did you also see the lantern?
Yes.
I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 6. Does that look to be the lantern? Does that look familiar?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Can you tell us for the record, is State's Exhibit 115, the stern light, taller than State's Exhibit 6, the lantern?
As it sits on that table, yes.
You talked about the bass boat violating Rule 20. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. You said rules concerning lights shall be complied with from sunset to sunrise, and during such times no other light shall be exhibited, except such lights which cannot be mistaken for the lights specified in these rules, or do not impair their visibility or distinctive character, or interfere with the keeping of a proper lookout. So people are allowed to have other lights as long as they don't impair the required navigation lights. Isn't that correct?
That's one of the clauses.
Okay.
It's one of several. There are several conditions that are listed that allow that.
Okay. What are the other conditions?
Shall not impair their visibility or distinctive character or interfere with the keeping of a proper lookout.
Was this a night of restricted visibility?
According to the DNR reports, the visibility was good that night.
Right.
It was at night, and it is common sense that it's not as easy to see as clearly at night as it is during the day.
But there was no fog, right?
There's no mention of any fog or mist, no.
Or rain, correct?
That's right.
Isn't restricted visibility also defined in the rules?
Yes, I think it is.
Would you say that there's, being an engineer, there's a difference in the circumference or the size of these two lights?
Well, certainly there's a difference in the size of the two enclosures, if that's what you're referring to.
Yes. Well, we've already talked about the difference in height, correct?
Yes.
And so there's a difference in the circumference of these lights, the enclosures.
Of the containers, if you want to think of it that way, the housings.
You make a conclusion in your report, don't you, that the lantern must have blinded the bay liner. Isn't that correct?
I'm looking to see my wording because I don't think I used the word blinded.
Okay. Page 2 of your report, last paragraph.
All right.
Okay. Did you use the word blinded?
I did.
And tell me again, do you remember what the defendant said about seeing lights?
Recollection is that he didn't see any lights prior to impact.
So you didn't have any information to base your conclusion in that paragraph, that he was blinded by the lantern. Did you?
Only 50 years of life experience that have shown me over time that it's difficult when there's a bright light at night to see objects that are, nearby, very close to it or around it.
Okay. And when did you see this light at? What time of day was it?
When I saw the lantern,
Yes, when you saw the lantern.
I saw it. It was daylight.
Okay. And so in your 50 years of lifetime experience, it's your experience that someone would be blinded by that light at night and then drive into it?
Objections to the compound form.
Rephrase.
Mr. Bean, is it your experience through your 50 plus years, plus all your professional experience, that someone would be blinded by that light at night?
I would phrase it as saying that the ability to see clearly objects that are in the immediate vicinity of that light would be difficult to see the details of, and that bright light could be very difficult to ascertain its precise location.
Okay, so and then through your experience and training and whatever else, it's your conclusion that someone would drive into it?
When lights are viewed on the water reflects and refracts light much like a strong mirror, but with the waves making it somewhat unpredictable as to the ability to tell exactly where a light is. And when you combine that with background lighting on shore, it can be very difficult to tell where the light is. It can be easily confused with the light on shore, and the distance that it is from you may not be apparent.
And would his speeding have slow his reaction time in order to correct himself about that light?
Objection.
Would you repeat the question?
Would his speeding have anything to do with his ability to correct himself with regard to that light?
Objection.
Would you rephrase?
You've already said that it's your experience that someone might confuse that light because it reflects on the water. So someone has to take extra time, don't they, in order to kind of deduce where that light is coming from?
That's often true, yes.
I'm sorry?
That's often true.
Okay. So you need the extra time to make a good judgment about where that light's coming from if you see it out on the water, don't you?
Objection.
Would counsel approach?
Mr. Bean, using your engineering experience and to a reasonable degree of engineering certainty, would the defendant's speeding down that lake make it difficult for him to have enough time to ascertain whether that light is a dangerous situation?
Objection.
Overruled.
Go ahead.
Your Honor, do I proceed with answering the question?
Yes.
Your question sounds like it assumes that I came to the conclusion that the defendant was speeding.
Okay, but he admitted he was speeding. So now, answer my question.
The faster that someone's traveling, whether it be on land or water, the less time there is to react to a hazard in front of you.
According to the navigation rules that you quoted, and there are other ones out there that you haven't quoted or put in your report, did he have a duty to take evasive action if that fishing boat wasn't getting out of the way?
Objection to the formal question.
Overruled.
The navigation rules are written in such a way that the way they're written, if you're involved in a collision, you violated at least the rule that says you shouldn't run into another vessel.
Okay. And can you answer my question? Did he have a duty to take evasive action if that fishing boat wasn't moving out of the way?
Yes.
Mr. Bean, only one of your conclusions really has to do with the physical evidence in this case, isn't that right?
Let me refresh my memory if you can. Can you repeat your question, please?
I said, only one of your conclusions has to do with the physical evidence, isn't that right?
No, ma'am, that's not correct.
Okay. So, other than conclusion number 4, which you write based on physical evidence, what were your other 3 conclusions based on?
There's physical evidence to support those conclusions. For example, conclusion 1, the bass tracker was in violation of Rule 15.
But we know it's at nighttime, right?
My point is there was physical evidence to support my conclusion, which is what you asked.
Okay. But we already know when in a crossing situation, they have to be in sight of each other, don't they?
Objection.
Sustained.
Let's go to conclusion number 4. This is where you take measurements and looking at the striations on the bass tracker bow plate. Isn't that correct?
Troy, can you repeat the question, please?
This conclusion is based on your measurements and your 3D scan of the boats. That's what this conclusion is based on, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And this is also where you decided, or not decided, but you looked at the striations on the bass tracker bow plate as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you also came up with this angle of penetration, I guess you want to call it, of 47 degrees. Is that right?
It was similar to that. Didn't match exactly, but it was close.
Okay. I think yours was like 47.1, I think, when I looked at the pictures. Do you recall that?
No, I mean, it may have been 49. It was close.
Okay. So you agreed essentially with Mr. McCullough's report that that same angle that he got from measuring those striations of the bow plate were the same ones that you got. Is that right?
They were essentially, yes, they were consistent.
And you're used to dealing in numbers and formulas as an engineer. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know what amount of force it takes to penetrate that bayliner at that area in the bow there?
I don't have a number, no.
So you don't know like the amount of foot-pounds it would take to actually penetrate that fiberglass, do you?
No.
Have you investigated or recreated accidents or crashes that occurred at low speeds as well?
I've been involved in accidents through a wide variety of speeds.
Okay. Can you say whether or not the amount of damage on that bayliner would have been created at a low speed?
Tell me what you define as low speed.
Less than 10 miles per hour.
All right. With that in mind, please restate your question.
would that amount, or what amount of damage would have been created had that collision been done at a low speed, less than 10 miles per hour?
I don't have any numerical calculations or empirical data that I can provide for that.
Okay. When you went out to see the boats, obviously you saw the bass tracker and the trolling motor. And I believe you said you had the trolling motor kind of put back up on the bow deck so you could see where it would have been
Objection.
during the collision. Is that right?
Objection.
Basis.
I'm trying to develop it so we don't have a confusion, Your Honor.
Set the stage.
I'm trying. Do you recall that, and Mr. Yurich showed you a picture of the trolling motor on top of the bow deck? Do you recall
I do.
having that done? Now, from your picture of that, did you see any, what is commonly referred to as transfer marks along the side of the bayliner that would coincide with that trolling motor and bass tracker?
There were some marks that could have potentially been from that, yes.
Okay. And did you have any reason to disagree with Mr. McCullough's report, which described those transfer marks?
You have to be, specific in which paragraph or wording you're referring to.
Okay. Do you recall a time during his report that you disagreed that it was a transfer mark?
Definitely disagreeing, not necessarily questioning, yes.
Okay. So you do recall a transfer mark that you disagreed with?
I recall a statement that he made regarding some marks about that subject
Okay.
where I questioned it, and
And what were you able to say when you went out there? Were you able to say that those weren't transfer marks?
my work in the field that day was a much broader scope than just that area.
Okay.
So I didn't spend much time focusing on just that particular issue.
Were you aware of where the DNA of the victim, Brian Cuppett, was found on the bow of the bayliner?
I know the general location.
Okay, and where was that?
It was near the front of the bayliner,
Okay. And-
just above the rub rail, I believe.
All right. And can you tell us on that bayliner, what's the widest part of that boat? Just in general.
The number or where?
I'm sorry?
You want the numerical value, or do you?
No. Where would the widest part of that boat be on the bayliner?
Generally, in a boat of that design, it's going to be near about halfway along the length.
Oh, okay. So you already testified before on direct that the bayliner sits higher than the bass tracker. Is that right?
My testimony was that in the perspective view of, at a certain point during the impact, that the bow of the bayliner, the gunnels of the bayliner would have been higher than those of the bass boat.
Okay.
But at rest, I didn't address that, if that's what you're getting at.
All right. I was just trying to see if the bayliner was higher than the bass tracker. That rubber around the bayliner, what's that called, that black piece?
It's called a rub rail.
A rib rail. Is it a rub rail or a rib?
It's a rub rail. It acts as a type of a bumper. So when the boat is docked, or pulled up against a pier, to keep it from getting scratched.
And because of the shape of that bow and the shape of that hull, would that rubber extend out further than the location of that gash in the bayliner?
Yes.
Would that part, even if we don't say that the boat went over the bass tracker, would that part at least go over the top of the bass tracker?
I'm not following you. I hear your words, but I'm not following your concept.
All right. You said before on direct that there's no evidence that the bayliner went over the bass tracker. Is that your testimony?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So there's no evidence on the hull of it that it like plowed over top of the bass tracker. It was penetrated by the bass tracker. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Would that rub rail be over top of the gunnel on the bass tracker at that point of penetration?
I'm just trying to picture in my mind what you're describing. The way I'm picturing what you're describing, I would say no.
So that part that extends out from the gash in the bayliner would not go over top of the bass tracker?
Are you inferring it would have been a location where it would have been struck? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
No, because the elevations are different.
Okay. The elevations are different, meaning that the bayliner was higher than the bass tracker?
Meaning that the point at which the bow of the bass tracker penetrated the bayliner was at a point below the rub rail.
Right. So the rub rail would have been up further.
Would have been up
Right.
further.
And actually closer to the bass tracker than where it was made contact with, correct?
Not in any significant way.
Okay.
Not in a way that would increase its likelihood of being contacted by the bass boat.
What about a person sitting in the bass boat?
Sorry, I didn't see the question in there.
I said, what about a person being in the bass boat? Could it have contacted a person sitting on the bass boat above the gunnel of the bass tracker?
I think there's a more complex geometry in what you're asking than that can be really visualized in just a broad brush description like that.
Okay. Could this bayliner have been going faster than 25 miles per hour?
Theoretically, the top speed of the boat is 40 plus miles an hour. So theoretically, the boat could have been traveling at a fairly high, a higher speed than 25.
Okay.
I don't see any reason I don't see any evidence that indicates or supports that.
That's right. You didn't see any evidence of it being on a plane. Is that what you said?
Said it was indeterminate.
Okay. You couldn't determine whether it was on a plane. Is that right?
Not with a high degree of certainty, no.
Okay. But the top of the gash that's in the bayliner is horizontal or parallel with the water. Isn't that correct?
In general, I'd say so. In general,
Okay. And When boats go at a low speed, are they level with the water? If they're at a very low idle speed, that kind of thing, before making any wake?
When they're operating in a displacement mode, as we discussed before, yes.
I'm sorry?
Yes, when a boat is operating in a low speed in a displacement mode,
Okay.
then they're going to be, the water line will be level.
Okay. And what about at transition?
In transition, the boat is typically going to be traveling at anywhere from a 12 to 16 degree angle, nose up attitude.
So if something had penetrated that boat at level, something that was level, penetrated the boat that was in transition, that was going to be tilted up, would we see the angle tilted up on that gash?
It depends on how the gash was made.
Okay. What about in this situation? This is another boat sitting still in the water, and a boat in transition hits it. Would we see an angle going upwards instead of horizontal?
Objection.
Rephrase.
Would a boat in transition angle be different than horizontal?
The trim angle of a boat in transition would be different.
I'm sorry.
The trim angle of a boat in transition is different than a boat that is on plane, fully on plane.
So it's going to be, you said, a 12 to 16 degree angle?
For a boat in transition, yes.
Did you have that in this case?
Are you asking if I concluded that the boat was in transition?
No, I'm asking you if when you looked at that gash, the V, the top of the V, if it was 12 to 16 degrees.
The top of the V is not necessarily an indicator of the trim angle of the bayliner.
What about the horizontal line at the top of the gash?
We discussed this earlier this morning. The horizontal line at the top was the assumption of the DNR officer that that line was made in a way that assumed the bayliner was level, and therefore his conclusion was on plane, was what his conclusion was. And we had a long discussion earlier this morning about how that wasn't necessarily the case and why.
Actually, we never talked about why. So, would you have seen an angle on that top line if he was in transition?
Not in the way that I believe that line was created.
So you wouldn't. Would we have had this amount of damage if that bayliner was going only 10 miles per hour?
Objection.
Sustained.
You talked about, in your cause of accident, that other boat traffic should have been expected. Do you recall saying that in your report?
Yes.
other boat traffic to be expected by both boaters in that situation?
I would say yes.
So the bayliner should have also known that other boat traffic should have been in that lake, is that correct?
From the operator of the bayliner's perspective, I believe he was basically in the center of the channel heading for the bridge and intended to cross underneath the bridge at the widest point available, which would have been the center. That was the widest span between the two bridge supports. And that was a common. My understanding is that would have been a common path for boats to take that were intending to cross underneath the bridge.
Do you know how wide that opening is?
I haven't measured it, no. I've seen a photograph of it.
How many boats could you fit under there at one time? Recreational boats.
You mean if it was a parking lot?
Yes.
Quite a few, I suppose, but that's not the way we allow for safe distances between boats that are traveling on a waterway.
And what would be the reason he needed to go to the center of the bridge?
It's the logical place. It's the section of the bridge where the supports are the farthest apart. It gives them the widest open and the widest, safest path to cross underneath.
Even if there's someone in his way? Is that right?
No, he wouldn't choose that if there were boats that were obviously in his path.
You said channel. Have you been given some information that this is a channel?
I haven't studied an official chart of the lake to identify where the official channel markers are.
Are you aware that there are no channel markers on this lake?
Only in the sense that when I was on the bridge looking out over the accident area, I didn't see any channel markers. So it would not surprise me to learn that there are none.
You said that in your cause of accident, each vessel was in violation of, at least in part of Rule 19, which states every vessel shall proceed at a safe speed, adapted to the prevailing circumstances and condition of restricted visibility. What speed was the Bass Tracker going? Was it not going at a safe speed?
We covered before that I don't have any reason to believe that the Bass Tracker was traveling at a significant or a high rate of speed.
So how is he in violation of that safe speed?
The rule has more to do with than just speed.
The what?
The rule is not just about speed.
Okay. It's about restricted visibility, right? As well.
You have it right there. Would you read the rule again for me, please?
19B, every vessel shall proceed at a safe speed adapted to the prevailing circumstances and conditions of restricted visibility. A power-driven vessel shall have her engines ready for immediate maneuver.
That last part to me is critical.
Okay?
Power-driven vessel having its engines ready for immediate maneuver.
And that's in the restricted visibility rule, isn't it? Rule 19. We've already talked, wasn't it a clear night that night?
It was a clear night. It was dark.
There was no fog, right?
There's no mention of any fog. There was statements in regards to the fact that there were other boats on the water that could be clearly seen. And the DNR reports indicate visibility was good.
Okay. So this is not a situation of restricted visibility.
Objection.
Sustained.
Is this a situation of restricted visibility?
Objection.
Would counsel approach?
You had evidence that the Bass Tracker's motor was kind of tipped forward and the propeller was out of the water at the time of the impact. Is that correct?
Yes,
And so it's your opinion that the Bass Tracker should have put its motor back in, started it up, and gotten out of the way. Is that right?
I believe that the bass tracker should have been in a position to use the outboard motor to get out of the way of any oncoming traffic if necessary.
So if someone just happens to be driving too fast down the lake under the influence, they should have to get out of the way?
Objection.
Sustained.
Do you know the time it would take to put the motor down and get it started?
I believe the point of the rule is that the vessel should be ready to use that propulsion system to get out of the way at a moment's notice.
And that's in a restricted visibility situation, isn't that right? Is that right?
From a common sense standpoint, it's in any situation where you're in a position of obstructing another vessel that you have to give way to.
Are there lane markers on the lake?
You said there were no channel markers on this lake.
Right. So is there a certain, you only have 10 feet to go through the lake on or anything like that? Any restrictions about how much of the lake to use in order to cross?
Most boaters would tend to cross under a bridge, like the 224 bridge, at what they deem to be the safest point, the deepest part of the channel, which is going to be in the center of that bridge, between the bridge supports that are the widest apart.
Do you know where this Bass Tracker was in relation to the bridge? How far out it was?
Only a general idea as drawn and sketched in the DNR reports by their investigation. They give a diagram that shows the relative location of the boats to the bridge.
Is that diagram to scale?
I don't believe it's to scale.
Do you know when that diagram was made, whether it was before the reconstruction efforts by Mr. McCullough or after?
Objection.
Overruled.
Do you know?
No, I would have looked at the date on the report and used that as the approximate time of the creation of that diagram.
You talked in the beginning of your direct examination that you were engaged as a client by Attorney Lynn Morrow's office, right?
I was retained by Lynn Morrow's office, yes.
How much are you getting paid to testify here today?
Objection.
Overruled.
My standard billing rate is $175 an hour for working on an investigation, and that rate applies to engineering work, testimony at trial, report time, whatever I'm doing to work on the case.
And how many hours have you already spent working on this case?
I don't recall the specific number.
Is a certain minimum number of hours that you require before being retained?
No. No, I'm not specifically being paid to testify. I'm being paid according to the hourly rate that I don't, charge on the case.
But that's what I understood, Mr. Beam. I'm sorry. That's what I got from your first statement. Can I have 1 second, John?
Yes.
Mr. Beam, do you fish at all? Do you go fishing?
I did in my youth, but I don't now.
Familiar with why they use a trolling motor as opposed to the regular boat motor while they fish?
Yes, somewhat.
And why do they do that?
Trolling motor it's quieter. It is often considered to be more reliable because it's electric. It doesn't have an engine that has to start. It doesn't have a gasoline-powered engine that has to start.
Are they you said before, typically quieter, right?
Yes.
I have nothing further.
Viewers.
Just have a few things, Mr. Bean. Just going back to what you were just asked now about the trolling motor. Does the trolling motor in this boat have the ability to start with the foot pedal?
I didn't see it as it was originally mounted in the boat. It was after the accident. But it would not be uncommon for a trolling motor to have a foot-operated control.
Okay, so that motor could be used to try to get out of the way, correct?
It could.
Is there anything about the fact that you want to troll around quietly to try to catch fish that changes your legal obligation to get out of the way if there's a boat approaching you from the starboard side?
No, sir.
The size of the boats here are roughly the same, is that correct?
That's true. In overall length, they're approximately the same.
Okay. So when you were being asked all those questions about freighters and stuff, this isn't a Bayliner versus the Saratoga or anything, is it? These are boats of approximately the same size?
That's right.
And when she asked you some questions about the lantern having the ability or possibility of blinding someone, doesn't your report say blinding the side lights from view?
That was my concern, yes, that the combination bow light, which displays the red and green indicating which side you're looking at, would be obscured by the lantern.
Okay. You were asked a whole bunch of questions about, did you measure from the campground down to the point of the impact? Do you remember those questions?
Yes, sir.
Did you review the state's report as part of what the work you did in this case?
I did review that.
Were there any measurements taken by any agents of the state of Ohio to measure the distance from the campground down to the alleged site of the crash?
I don't recall any specific measurements. There may have been a general statement of, approximately a quarter mile or approximately some distance, but I don't recall, any instrumentation used to make a specific measurement of a distance between two known points.
Yes.
Just going to put up here for 1 second again, Defendant's Exhibit, Z as in zebra. This is the one that has 6 of the scans that you produced in connection with this case, correct?
Yes, sir.
Directing your attention to number 4, which is one of the points of impact. You were asked some questions about the rub rail going over the top of the bass tracker. You remember those questions?
Yes, sir.
Does that scan show whether or not the rub rail would have been able to go over the top of the bass boat as this collision occurred?
From the overhead view, there is a portion of the rub rail that would be, in elevation terms, being higher than the bass boat.
Okay. Is there anything in any of your scans to show whether it went over the top of the bass boat?
So I'm confused by the different phrases you used of.
All right, let me try this. Is there anything that showed that the rub rail would have struck either of the passengers?
I can see where it might be possible for the rub rail to have an impact on the passenger that was sitting in the chair on the foredeck.
Is that because the collision forces the front or bow of the beam down a little bit, as you described earlier?
That's part of it. The other part of it is the concept we discussed earlier, that the bass boat is being rotated rapidly, in effect yanking the boat, in layman's terms, out from under the occupant that's sitting in it. And so the bayliner is progressing on a path that has now pushed the bass boat out of its way, and the passenger or the occupant is still essentially for a brief moment where he was. And for that brief moment, it's enough time for the rub rail of the bayliner to make contact with that person.
Did you see in your report, in reviewing the state's report, anywhere that the state requested any weather reports?
As part of their investigation?
As part of its investigation?
Not that I recall.
Okay. And did you see that the state conducted any studies to determine the depth or the width of the lake?
Not that I recall.
Okay, that's all I have. Thanks.
Any recross?
Mr. Beam, did you do any tests on the lantern to check for brightness, anything like that?
No, ma'am.
I'm sorry?
No.
No further question.
Did you see anything that anybody else conducted a test on this lantern?
No, I didn't see any.
That's all I have. Thank you.
No, nothing. Thank you.
You may step down, sir. Thank you. I think for Kathy's benefit, let's take a recess of about 10 minutes.
All right. Court is in recess.
Yes, we have 5.
Okay, can you tell us about that?
Sure. 2 from Joe's previous marriage, Sophia and Dominic, they're 13 and 9. And then Joe and I have 3 between the 2 of us. Charlie, she's going to be 3 this week. Joey will be 21 months, and we just had a little baby boy, Hendrix, a few weeks ago.
Congratulations. Let's talk about Charlie for a second, just because of what we're going to be talking about in a few moments. Is Charlie the child who you had at the time of the weekend of the boating accident?
Correct.
And how old was Charlie at that time?
About 10 months.
Can you tell me, please, what your employment is?
Sure, I'm a family physician.
And how long have you been licensed?
About 6 years, 7 years or so.
And how about your husband, Joe? What's his employment?
He's a general surgeon.
I want to talk for a second about the home on Hawthorne. Do you now, or did you at one time, own a home on Hawthorne out near the Berlin Reservoir?
Yes.
Can you tell me about that, please? Whose
Sure.
home was it? How did you acquire it?
Sure, I bought the home myself probably 3 years prior to being married to Joe, and I lived out there full-time myself.
And then once you and Joe got married, did you live in another area of the valley?
When we got married, I moved into our home in Poland, but we still had the lake house for quite some time.
I want to direct your attention, if I can, Angelina, to the weekend of the accident and ask you to tell us what you can recall. So let's start with, first of all, do you recall under what circumstances you and Joe and Charlie went out to the lake that weekend?
Sure, we got off early from work on Friday.
Never, I was going to ask you, remember what day it was?
Yes, Friday.
Okay.
And like we often did, headed up to the lake house early in the afternoon with Charlie.
When you say we got off, you and Joe, do you have work together and have the same schedule, or do you have to coordinate your schedules?
We have to coordinate our schedules. I work usually around 8 a.m. and half a day would be about noon. For Joe, he gets up much earlier. Usually he's up and out of the house before I'm even finishing my last dream in the morning, honestly.
All right, so the 2 of you coordinate your schedules to get this half day off. The 3 of you go out to Berlin, is that right?
Yes.
Remember stopping any place on the way out, anything like that?
Yeah, we stopped at Sparkle on Western Reserve to buy some groceries for the next day. Our friends, Candy and Matthew, were coming from Akron to have a cookout.
And did you guys then drive out to the home on Hawthorne?
Yes.
Do you know what?
Hawthorne?
Hawthorne, yeah.
North Benton.
North Benton, all right. And it's sort of at one end of the lake, is that right?
Yes.
Can you tell us, if you remember, what you and Joe and Charlie did once you arrived out to the lake?
Sure. Basically unloaded the groceries, unloaded a few of the things that we had brought for Charlie for the weekend. Started to put away the groceries. I packed a little cooler with Charlie's milk and some snacks to go out on the boat for the afternoon.
Okay. Do you remember, I know you're not looking at your watch exactly, but can you give us some rough idea of what time you think you guys arrived at the lake house?
Probably about 2 p.m.
Okay. And after you unpacked the groceries and all that sort of stuff, were you and Joe doing separate things?
Yes, I was unpacking the groceries and getting Charlie ready to go out on the boat. And Joe often does, went down to the boat to kind of untarp it and get it ready. It had been sitting all week, at least, you know, at the dock, so getting the boat ready for us to go out.
Okay. Okay. I'm informed that you still need to speak up even louder. I know
Okay.
That probably seems difficult from where you're sitting, but if someone asks you that, yell at me a little louder, okay?
Sure, no problem.
You said that Joe went down to the boat. We haven't been out there during the course of this trial. Can you sort of describe for us where the boat is in relation to your home?
Yes, the water, the dock in the water where the boat sits is about a football field away, 300 feet or so. There's a slight incline going down to the water. Depends on, there's a drop off as well, with some stairs going actually down to the dock and the water line. It depends on the level of the water, whether or not you can actually see the dock or the boat. Just depends on the time of year.
Okay, does the level of water fluctuate at Berlin Reservoir?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and so when you say it depends on the level of water, whether you can see the boat, are you talking up from the perspective of the house?
Correct.
You mentioned some stairs going down from the house down to the dock area. Do you remember if those stairs were in good repair or not good repair?
My father built them. They were not in good repair at the time. This day, the
This
accident
weekend we're
occurred.
talking about?
Yes.
Okay. Remember what was wrong?
I believe one of the steps was kind of sideways and one was actually missing.
Okay. Do you remember if the boat dock, yeah, I assume you have to walk out onto a dock to be able to get onto your boat, correct?
Correct.
Do you remember if there was anything damaged or in need of repair on the boat dock itself?
Yes, because of winter and we leave the dock in place during the winter, there was a missing board walking out to the dock.
Okay. And is that something you'd have to negotiate to be able to get from the shore to into the boat?
Yes.
All right, so I think before I asked you for the geography lesson, you were telling me that you were up at the house doing some things and Joe had gone down to the boat.
Yes.
You guys have communication? How do you coordinate what you're going to do after that?
Usually we would call each other, so that day I called Joe just to check to see if he was ready and if I should start packing up the baby to head down.
When you say call, on cell phones?
Yes.
And did Joe have the boat ready?
Yes.
So then tell us what happened next, please.
So I just got the baby and the stuff and went down to the boat and got on the boat.
So did the three of you then go out on the boat?
Yes.
Who was driving the boat?
Joe.
And do you remember what part of the lake you went to?
Yes.
What part?
We refer to it as the beach.
Okay. I'm not going to try to put you on the spot, so you tell me yes or no. We have a map behind you that if you think you can help us out with, I'll put it up here and ask you to sort of, you think you can do that?
I think so.
Okay. May I, Aaron?
Yes.
Thank you. So let's start with a couple of the basics. First of all, we marked this as State's Exhibit 4. Do you recognize this to be a photograph of Berlin Reservoir?
Yes.
Okay. If the judge will allow you, if I were to ask you, could you be able to come down here and show me, first of all, about where your home is on Hawthorne?
Sure.
Yes.
Thank you. And now that you're away from Kathy, I'm going to ask you to talk even louder if you can believe that. And if you don't mind, turn toward her so she can take down everything that you say. Can you show us the general area where Hawthorne is, where your house is?
Yes.
Now, you were talking about you and Joe and Charlie going out to an area that you call the beach. Can you tell us about where that is? And you know what, I'm going to swap with you so now you're facing Kathy. How's that?
We would have come up our cove here. I believe this is the railroad truss. Come around there and the beach is,
Sort of off the picture
I
there?
don't see it on the picture,
Okay.
but it's around here.
Okay, but that line that's running sort of up and down is the railroad line, is that right?
Yes.
And is there a bridge that crosses part of the Berlin Reservoir
Yes.
with the railroad track on it?
This here, yes.
Right there. Okay, so do you go under that to get to this beach area?
Yes.
You see where the 224 bridge is on this diagram, on this photograph?
Yes.
Did you folks that afternoon go up in the area of the bridge?
No, sir.
Okay, did you cross the bridge and go up to the other part of the lake?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. To the best of your recollection, when you go out to this beach area, do you encounter anybody that you know?
Yes.
Who's that place?
Andy Krogan.
Okay. And I know this sounds stupid, but you have to tell us because none of us were there. Was Andy on a boat? Did he fly in? Did he drive in? How did you run into Andy?
He was on his boat.
If you remember, was Andy already at the beach area or came later, or you don't remember?
I don't remember.
Fair enough. Do you remember if anybody was on the boat with Andy?
Yes, his friend Ben and his friend Ben had a female friend, of which I don't know her name.
You don't remember her name? All right, fair enough. So there's three of them, on Andy's boat, and the three of you on your boat, correct?
Yes.
So tell us then, what do you do at this beach area?
We generally would tie up. Joe pulls up onto the shore, the front of the boat, goes off the front and ties to like a tree in the front, and then
So this is an area where you can sort
yes,
of run the boat aground without permanently running it aground.
yes.
All right.
And he ties to Andy's boat as well to the left
Okay.
of us.
And then what do you guys do?
I stay on the boat, hang with the baby, listen to music, just kind of sit there and chat.
Would you be able to give us some estimate of how long you think you were out there hanging out? I'm sorry, before I ask you that, if you remember, did anybody else come down to your little gathering that day? Any other friends or anything like that?
Not that I
All
recall.
right. So it's just the six of you as best you can remember?
Yes.
All right. Now I'll ask you, about how long do you think that you were there?
We were there probably about 1.5 to 2 hours.
And then what happens at the end of that 1.5 to 2 hours?
We untie and go home.
Who's driving the boat when you go home?
Joe.
Okay. The three of you on the boat again?
Yes.
Does Andy and his friends, do they follow you over to your house?
No.
No. So it's just the three of you guys that arrive back at your dock?
Yes.
All right. Then tell us what happens after you arrive back at your home.
Well, Joe ties up the boat. We walk together up to the house, get Charlie settled in, and Joe prepares dinner for us.
Okay. Do you remember what Joe was doing or what he was cooking, anything like that?
Yeah, Joe usually does all the cooking. This day it was hot dogs on the grill.
So after he's done cooking, did the three of you have dinner?
Yes.
I know you're not looking right at the watch, but can you just give us a general idea of about what time you think it was when you're having dinner now?
About shortly after 6 p.m. or so.
Okay. Sun's still out at this point?
Yes.
If you remember, how's the weather?
Pleasant, I don't remember exactly.
All right. So then after dinner, tell us what happens next.
We set up Charlie's playpen that she sleeps in when we're at the lake in the spare bedroom, get her settled. kind of sit in the living room for a little bit, and then I go and change into my pajamas. That's about
Okay.
the event of it.
Does there come a point in time when Joe leaves?
Yes, eventually.
All right. And we're going to talk about what sort of leads up to that from what you observed.
When I was changing into my pajamas in our bedroom, Andy called and had asked Joe to go hang out. And we spent a bit of time, I spent a bit of time pouting and throwing a fit over it.
All right. You say pouting. First of all, I know that we talked about Charlie being 10 months old. What is your condition otherwise at this point?
About 4 or 5 months pregnant.
Okay. All right, so you and Joe get into a discussion about Andy's request for Joe to come and meet him.
Correct.
Okay. And you said you spent some time pouting about that.
15 minutes or so.
Okay. What ultimately happens? How do you give up the pout?
I do. Joe works very hard and spends most of his time, any downtime, with myself and the kids. So I give in and basically say, okay.
All right. And then tell us from your observation when Joe leaves, and when I say from your observation, are you outside watching him walk down, or you just stay in the house and Joe leaves?
I just stay in the house.
Okay. Are you able to hear the boat from where you are inside the house, or does it kind of depend on what's going on?
No, I can't hear the boat.
Can't hear it? Okay. Are you able to give us some idea of either what time Andy called or what time Joe left, or both?
The first time Andy called was around 9 p.m. and the second call was, like I said, after our discussion, maybe 15 minutes later, and he left just briefly after that.
Joe left briefly after that?
Yes.
Okay. And then, do you hear from Joe again while he's out with Andy? I mean, are you guys talking on the phone or anything like that, or is it pretty much Joe's just out?
We didn't talk on the phone until just before he was getting ready to come back home. There was a couple text messages here or there, mainly from me kind of asking when he's coming home and pressuring him to do so.
So if you said text messages and a phone call maybe?
One phone call just prior to him leaving Andy's dock to come home.
Okay. Any idea about what time that phone call was?
Yes, it was about 11:30 p.m.
And then, do you go to sleep because you know that Joe's coming home, or are you waiting up for him?
No, I was waiting anxiously for him.
Okay. And then tell us the next thing that you remember happening in relation to whether Joe came home.
I talked to him around 11:30. He let me know that he was wrapping it up and going to be coming home very shortly. And about probably 15 or 20 minutes later, my friend Melissa texted me that he had just left the dock, just to let me know he was on his way home.
Okay.
But like I said, you know, I was worried about him being out at night by himself, so I was watching intently for him to pull in.
Okay. And do you see Joe pull in?
I do.
Are you able to see the boat, hear the boat, or both?
Neither. I could see the lights on the boat.
I see. Okay. So you can see the lights coming into your dock area, is that it?
Yes.
So then, what's the next thing that you remember happening after you see the lights pulling into the dock?
I looked at my phone. I could see him. There's 2 solar lights that my dad had placed at the top of the stairs, and I could see basically his shadow, his feet going past those. And I kind of felt like it was taking him a while to come up to the house.
Okay. Do you have any idea about what time this is?
I remember looking at my phone because I was, worried and watching the time from the time he left to get home, and it was 12:05 a.m.
All right, so then you mentioned you can sort of see Joe's feet, I guess, from these solar lights, correct?
Yes.
All right, and it seems to be taking a little longer than you think it should, so then what happens next?
I call him to basically say, "What are you doing? When are you coming up here?"
All right, and you remember any idea what time that call was?
Not exactly, but within probably 5 or 10 minutes of seeing him get into or pull into the dock.
Okay, and once you have that phone call, does Joe, what happens? Does Joe come up or does he not come up?
He comes up very briefly after that.
Okay, and when you see Joe, how would you describe him? How would you describe what you saw?
He was shaken up.
Okay. Did the two of you have a conversation about him being shaken up?
Yes, he comes up to the house and basically told me that he had hit something.
Okay. Did he tell you what he had hit?
No, I thought he hit the neighbor's dock or something was my initial thoughts pulling into the cove.
You said Joe was shaken up. Did he seem upset?
Yeah, he seemed upset, anxious, and like I said, pretty shaken up.
Okay. Did you get up close to him and talk to him?
Yes,
Okay. Were you able to observe, besides his demeanor and his emotional state, were you able to observe how he appeared?
yes,
Did he appear to you to in any way be impaired?
no,
Objection.
Sustained.
Was he slurring his words?
no,
Did you have a strong odor of alcohol emanating from his mouth coming toward your nose?
no, sir,
Was he in any way unable to walk or maintain his balance or anything like that?
no,
Other than being upset, was he unable to communicate with you effectively?
no,
Did his speech seem slurred?
no,
Objection.
Rephrase.
How would you describe his speech?
normal,
Was it clear and coherent?
yes,
How about his eyes? Did you notice anything about his eyes, if they were unusual in any way?
no, sir,
So after you have the conversation with Joe about he hit something, then tell us what happens next. Are you guys outside, by the way, while this is going on, Angelina?
he was where we met when he came up to the house. I had opened the sliding glass door, and he was just walking up to the house. So
So you're sort of in and he's out?
yes,
Okay. Does he come into the house then?
yes.
All right. So then, I interrupted you. Tell us what happens then after Joe comes up and comes into the house.
I basically try to ask him questions about the last thing that he remembered, trying to figure out what he hit and exactly what had happened when he's saying he hit something.
Was he able to tell you what he had hit?
No,
Did you guys call the police at that point in time?
no.
Why?
I felt it was important to figure out what had happened first before calling the police.
Okay. And did you guys do anything to try to figure out what had happened other than you asking Joe questions?
Yes, we made numerous phone calls to our friends whom he had just left at the dock.
Okay. Do you remember calling anybody in particular?
Eventually, yes, I call our friend Nick and Sherry. Neither one of them answer, but they do eventually call me back.
So, as a result of these Well, let me ask you, does Joe at any point want to call the police?
He does.
Okay. And do you guys call the police then?
Probably 5 or 10 minutes after that.
Okay. And why don't you call right away when Joe wants to call the police?
Because I still hadn't figured out exactly what he had hit and what had happened.
All right. Now, you can't necessarily tell us what people told you, but as a result of the texting and the phone calls that you were engaging with the friends, did you come to believe something about what Joe had hit?
Yes, I knew that there was this talk about a distress call, so they both basically just divulged to me that the distress call involved a boat and there was an ambulance on site.
Okay. So are you beginning to sort of put 2 and 2 together that maybe that this was, that what Joe hit was tied to this?
Yes.
Has he still been able to tell you what he hit?
No. Actually, I was afraid to tell him because he was so emotionally distressed and I was there by myself with him.
All right.
I spent a couple minutes kind of explaining that to Sherry on the phone before we ended our conversation.
Okay. So then, any recollection about what time you're talking to Sherry?
Yeah, just after 1 a.m.
And then, once you finish talking to Sherry, what's the next thing that happens?
I hang up the phone. I just basically say to Joe it was a boat and immediately call 911.
And when you call 911, what sort of information do you give them?
I believe I just told them my husband had hit a boat.
Did you later identify Joe in that call?
I don't remember.
Okay. Do you remember if you identified yourself?
I don't remember.
Okay. Do you remember if you gave the police some way to figure out, well, where do we go to talk about this?
I remember asking them, I called 911 and I remember asking them for the Deerfield Police Department or something like that. And then the dispatcher started asking me questions, our address and things like that.
While all this is going on, are you in the same room or the same proximity with Joe?
Not during the entire time from the time you came home to calling 911, but at that moment, yes.
Okay. I realize you weren't in the same room with him all the time, but had you had a fair amount of contact with him
Yes.
during this time? Okay. Around the time you called 911, can you describe Joe's physical appearance? Was he unable to walk?
Well, no,
Was he losing his balance?
Objection.
no.
What can you tell me about Joe's speech during this point in time in terms of whether it was normal or not?
It was normal.
Okay. What can you tell me about Joe's ability to walk or move around?
Completely normal.
What, if anything, can you tell me about Joe's eyes?
Normal.
Now, after you call 911, if you remember, does anybody else come over to your house on Hawthorne?
Yes, Sherry sent Andy and Nick, Nick's friend, a female, again, I don't know her name.
Okay. And do they stay long or do they not stay long?
No, just briefly,
And then do the police arrive?
yes.
And are you with Joe when he is talking to the police?
Yes, the whole time.
What's his emotional state at this point?
Well, it depends on what point you're talking.
All right,
Because there was
let's try it this way. There comes a point in time during the evening, isn't there, when Joe learns that there's been a fatality?
Yes.
All right, let's talk about between the point in time that the police arrive and that point in time. Can you describe Joe's emotional state or condition?
Yes, at this point, it's clear that there was a boat that he had collided with. So he was very emotionally distressed, panicking in a sense.
How about physically though? Has it changed in any way physically?
No, sir.
Are you there when the police arrive?
Yes.
Are you there for at least some of the time when Joe talks to the police?
Yes.
If you know, is there a point in time where Joe leaves with the police detective to go down to look at the boat?
Yes.
Do you go down with them?
No.
And this is probably an unfair question, but do your best with it. How long would you say the police were there? Was it minutes or hours?
The entire night.
Okay. We were talking a few minutes ago, there's a point in time where Joe learns that there's been a fatality.
Correct.
Are you present when that happens?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that, please?
I'm sorry. You're on
It's
it.
okay. Take your time. You need some water?
Maybe a tissue.
There's one right there.
I'm sorry for losing my composure. I don't mean to be disrespectful. There is a point in time where Lieutenant Johnson comes back into the house and tells Joe basically that there was a fatality. And at that point, clearly, Joe became severely psychologically distressed.
How about his physical appearance? Does he still appear to be coordinated?
Yes.
Is there a point in time where the police ask? Is there a point in time where the police ask if they can take the boat?
Yes.
And you guys agree to let them take the boat?
Yes.
Do you agree to let them take the trailer?
Yes, the tags were in the glove compartment. And basically, I got them all set up to do what they needed to do.
Did you ever see a time during this evening that we're talking about where Joe was unable to maintain his balance when walking?
Objection.
No.
Overruled.
No, sir.
Did you ever see a time where he was swaying or anything like that?
No.
Did you ever see a time where his speech was incoherent?
No.
Just a second. Angelina, I have just a couple more questions for you. I asked you about when Joe cooked dinner. You remember how, you said he cooked hot dogs.
Yes.
Do you remember how much he had to eat?
At least 3 or 4 hot dogs.
Was Joe in the military?
Yes. If you know, did he ever serve overseas? Yes.
If you know since coming back, has he ever been diagnosed with anything?
Objection.
May I see counsel?
Do you know if Joe was ever, sorry, did you say it correct or not?
Could not.
I'm sorry. Strike that. Have you ever seen Joe had too much to drink?
A handful of times.
How about that night? Did you notice, well, when you've seen him do that, have you noticed how he's acted or behaved?
Like he's had too much to drink.
Okay? And what sort of things would you notice about him?
Similar to anybody I've seen that has too much to drink.
Okay.
Little bit slurred speech. I've never seen him severely intoxicated or impaired. Usually it's mild.
That night, did you see any of those signs?
No.
Yes.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Cross?
Good afternoon. Do people call you Mrs. Yurich? Do they call you Ms. Dr. Rodriguez? I mean, both apply, right?
You can call me Angelina.
Okay, Angelina. My name is Dawn Cantalamesa. I'm one of the prosecutors here. So you were pregnant back on May 8th, 2015, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
While pregnant, did any smells get on your nerve? I mean, some people recall having a heightened sense of smell during that time. Did you have that sort of reaction to being pregnant? Do you recall?
I had 3 pregnancies. It's hard. I'm not sure.
Okay. So you already said you didn't sense or recall any slurred speech or odor of alcohol on your husband that night, correct?
Objection to the formal question.
Compound.
All right. You already said that you didn't smell an odor of alcohol on your husband that night, is that right?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So you obviously, that night you didn't drink anything, is that right?
No, ma'am.
And you were there when Lieutenant Johnson was at your house when he was talking to your husband? Am I
Yes.
understanding? You recall him telling Lieutenant Johnson that he had a couple beers that night?
Yes.
Have you seen any of the evidence in this case? Like the surveillance video from Ben's restaurant or anything?
Just what I've seen at the lawyer's office.
Okay. Did you see him taking the shot at Ben's restaurant on the video?
Yeah.
from
I
that
didn't
night?
see that video.
Objection.
She said she didn't see it.
Are you trained to detect alcohol impairment?
No.
Have you been to any law enforcement training with regard to what to look for when detecting impairment?
No.
So you heard him tell Lieutenant Johnson that he had a couple beers, but you did not smell any alcohol on him. Is that right?
To the first part, no. And is that right? Yes.
Okay. But you heard him say to Lieutenant Johnson he had a couple beers. That's the part you did know.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you didn't smell any alcohol on his
Objection.
breath, is that right?
Ask the names.
Sustained.
How often would you go to the lake house prior to that weekend? How often did you go there?
With Joe?
Yeah.
Well, we used to go more often than after I had Charlie. So maybe once a month, twice a month.
Okay. Before Charlie or after Charlie?
I can't generalize because we'd only been out there a couple of times with Charlie.
Okay. And how many years you said you knew him about 6 years total?
I had mutual patients and we did the same training. We did training at the same place, so I knew of him in passing longer.
Did you ever see him at the lake prior to you guys dating?
No.
Do you recall when he bought that boat?
That was before my time.
Okay, so we already had the boat.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know where he kept that boat prior to you having that house together on the lake?
I guess it would depend on the season. I don't know.
You guys have been going out there a number of years prior to this happening, out to the lake?
2 summers.
Okay, so pretty familiar with that lake, would you say?
Myself?
Yes.
Yes.
And what about Joe? Is he pretty familiar with that lake?
Objection.
If she knows.
Seems to be.
Okay, so he knew right where this beach was, right? That you guys like ran around and tied off and kind of hung out on this beach?
Objection.
Did you have to show him?
Objection.
I guess there was a question posed and then you just moved on, so could you rephrase?
Did you have to show him where that beach was?
No.
Had you been there before?
Yes.
How many times do you think you've been out to that beach with Joe with that boat?
I'm not sure.
Had you been up to High Oaks Campground prior to this date?
Yes.
And had you been up there with Joe?
Yes.
Is that where you knew all these people to be at on the weekends? Like Melissa, Adam, Andy?
Those were my friends prior to meeting Joe.
So you've known them longer than
Correct.
Joe? Okay. Did you have a boat up there prior to Joe?
No.
You never had a boat? You recall him leaving around 9 o'clock or 9:15 soon after he talked to Andy, is that right?
Yes.
Did he have anything to drink with dinner when he was having these hot dogs?
No.
No beer at the house?
I don't know that.
Okay. Did you buy any beer at Sparkle when you went and picked up groceries that day?
No.
Do you recall having any beer in the fridge already?
I don't recall.
You said that you were worried about him after he left, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you know where he was planning to go once he left to go meet Andy?
Yes.
And where was that?
Andy's dock.
Okay. Did you know any of the plans from that location?
I don't recall.
Do you recall anyone or him mentioning that he was going to go to Ben's?
It's something we often did, yes.
Do you recall, what time did you say the clock said when he got home?
That night,
Yes.
12:05.
And you're sure about that?
Yes, ma'am.
How long does it take to get from your dock up to Andy's dock by High Oaks?
By boat,
Yes.
15, 20 minutes.
What about at night? How long does it take?
I'm not sure.
Do you know of a speed limit on that lake at night?
No, ma'am.
You've never seen any of the signs posted around the lake about the speed limit at night?
No.
Have you ever gone out on the boat at night before?
With Joe, I can't recall.
You said he got home at 12:05 and he was slow coming up to the house, is that right?
Not sure what you mean by
Isn't that what you
slow.
just testified to? He was kind of coming up the stairs, you were watching the solar lights, and he was coming up slowly to the house, so you called him.
He
Objection.
physically wasn't slow.
Rephrase, please.
Was he slow coming up to the house?
I felt he was down there for a prolonged period of time. Yes.
So he was taking too long to come up to the house?
With my anxiety, yes.
You're saying when you saw him, you went and met him at the door. Is that right?
Yes.
Is this a two-story house, one-story house? What is this?
It's a one-story house, but it has a walkout basement.
Okay. So where were you looking out the window when you saw him on the dock?
The sliding glass door in the dining room.
Okay, so you never went to bed that night?
I was originally in bed when he left.
Okay. And then what made you stay up and go look for him at the door when he was coming home?
I always worry about my loved ones.
When you said Melissa texted you that
Yes.
he was on his way?
Yes.
And what time was that? Do you recall?
I don't recall exactly what time. Shortly after I talked to him on the phone.
And right, that was around 11:30, you thought, right?
Yes.
You said you didn't call the cops right away.
No.
Did he say he hit something?
Yes.
Did he know what it was?
No.
Did he mention anything about a rock when he came in?
No.
So he never said the word rock to you?
I don't recall.
And you decided not to call the police at that point?
No, ma'am.
I think you said before that you wanted to see what he remembered. Is that right?
I wanted to see the last thing that he remembered, yes.
Okay, was he having some problem with his memory that evening?
Not prior to that, no.
Just that night he was having some problem with his memory?
At that moment, he was.
And you still can smell any beer on his breath?
No, ma'am.
And no shots of Fireball on his breath?
I don't know what that is.
Sustained.
You didn't smell any other kind of alcohol on his breath?
No.
So you talked with Joe for over an hour before deciding to call the police, is that right?
I can't say exactly how long it was.
Didn't you tell Lieutenant Johnson when he was there that you guys talked for over an hour before deciding to call the police?
If that's what's in the statement, I can't recall at this time.
You said when Joe first got home he was emotional, is that right?
He was shooken up.
Okay. And you said he was emotional.
Objection.
Sustained.
Did you say he was upset?
No,
When he first got home, you didn't say he was upset when he first got home?
I don't believe I used that word.
Anxious? Did you use the word anxious?
I don't recall.
You said that when he first finds out that there was a fatality on the boat, that he became emotional then. Is that correct?
Correct.
Didn't you already tell us he was emotional before that?
Objection.
Sustained.
Didn't you say he was shaken up?
Yes.
So wasn't he already shaken up prior to learning that there was a fatality?
Yes.
Did you ever go look at the boat to try to figure out what Joe hit?
No, ma'am.
You said that you kind of determined that he hit another boat by talking to other people on the phone. Is that right?
Yes.
And this would be Sherry. Is there more than one person that you talked to on the phone?
Yes.
And who was that?
Nick and Sherry.
Okay. Is that the same phone call, or would that have been different phone calls?
2 different phone calls.
Do you know whether or not Nick or Sherry were at the site of the rescue?
No, I don't know.
You said before that there had been an ambulance deployed or
Sherry.
Did you call anyone else to find out what had happened with the ambulance?
No.
Did you notice any injuries on Joe at the house?
Yes.
What did you notice?
And he had an abrasion on the side of his neck.
When did you notice that?
Not till sometime later.
Was
Not
that-
immediately.
Was that before Lieutenant Johnson got there or after Lieutenant Johnson had left and come back?
I'm not sure. I believe after.
You said you were a little anxious that night, isn't that right?
Yes.
That you were worried about Joe, is that right?
Yes.
Are you worried about him every time he leaves the house?
Generally, yes.
Hang on 1 second.
You may.
Did you hear the defendant, your husband, tell Lieutenant Johnson that it was a rock that he hit?
Objection.
Overruled.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Is that the first time you heard the word rock mentioned at that time?
I'm not sure.
Did you ever hear the defendant, your husband, tell Lieutenant Johnson that he was worried the boat would sink?
I don't recall.
What about, do you recall the defendant telling Lieutenant Johnson about being injured? Did he say he was injured?
I'm not sure.
You're not sure if he said it, or you're not sure if you recall that?
I'm not sure if he said it.
Okay. Nothing further than thank you.
Redirect.
Can I look real quickly through
Yes.
these notes? Thanks. Yeah, it's in there.
Pictures of the file. It's in that box.
Yes.
Angelina, I'm going to hand you what we've marked. As State's Exhibit 45, which has previously been marked, and then I think the second one is marked Defendant's Exhibit GG, correct? It should have a blue label on it.
Correct.
Can you tell us what those are?
Pictures of my husband?
All right. Now, you were asked some questions about whether you saw an injury on Joe, correct?
Yes.
Is State's Exhibit 45 a picture that was taken while you were present of Joe's injuries?
Yes.
Do you remember about what time of the day or night that picture was taken?
About 4 a.m.
Okay. And can you tell us under what circumstances, that is, who took the picture and
Sure.
what you saw?
This was very shortly after Lieutenant Johnson had left for the night.
Okay.
Then he came back in specifically to take this photo.
Okay. I noticed in the top picture, Joe's sort of like his lip and his tongue are kind of out. Did you see Joe do anything between the time Lieutenant Johnson left and when he came back to take that picture, State's Exhibit 45?
Yeah, he put a dip in.
Okay. Of snuff or chewing tobacco?
Correct.
Okay. Defendant's Exhibit GG, which is the one below that, do you recognize that?
Yes.
Is that also a photograph of Joe's same injury?
Yes.
Was that taken also by Lieutenant Johnson?
Yes.
Did both of those pictures fairly and accurately depict what Joe looked like?
He's posing in this photo. We asked him to pose so he could get his neck, but
All right, when you say this photo, I'm going to ask you to tell me, is that State's Exhibit 45?
yes,
Okay.
45.
All right. Did both of those fairly and accurately depict his injury that you saw that night?
Yes.
Now, Ms. Campbell, let me just ask you, some questions about when Joe made dinner, if he had anything to drink. And I think she asked you questions about if there was beer in the house. Do you remember those questions?
Yes.
And I think you said you weren't sure, you didn't remember. Is that right?
Yes.
Do you know, do you remember, or do you not, whether Joe had anything alcoholic to drink when he had those hot dogs that night?
No,
No, you don't remember, or no, he did not?
he did not.
And then she asked you questions if you worried about when your husband leaves, correct?
Yes.
Were you worried why were you worried this night when Joe left?
I always worry about him, and he was going by himself on the boat.
Okay. If you remember, has he gone out on the boat before at nighttime?
No.
No? Is this the first time you remember him going out at nighttime by himself?
Yes.
That's all I have, thank you.
Any follow-up?
No, Your Honor.
You may step down, thank you. Nasty counsel. All right, a good opportunity to break for the day. We will resume tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock.
All right.